In this lesson, we will use quadratic inequalities to determine the domain of functions from their equation. Remember that one of the domain restrictions we know is that the radicand of a square root must be greater than or equal to 0. Therefore, to find the domain of the function f of x equals the square root of negative 3x squared plus 3x plus 18, we must solve the inequality negative 3x squared plus 3x plus 18 greater than or equal to 0. We can do this with our favorite method. I will use the sign of a quadratic to solve this inequality. First, I will factor the quadratic on the left. Negative 3 x squared minus x minus 6, and that will be negative 3 x minus 3 x plus 2 greater than or equal to 0. Then I will find the sign of the quadratic in the three intervals created by the zeros. The zeros are negative 2 and positive 3. The intervals are negative infinity to negative 2, negative 2 to 3, and 3 to infinity. Factor negative 3 is negative in all three intervals. Factor x minus 3 is 0 when x is equal to 3, and it is positive in 3 to infinity, and it is negative in the intervals negative infinity to negative 2 and negative 2 to 3. Factor x plus 2 is 0 when x is equal to negative 2. It is positive in the intervals negative 2, 3 and 3, infinity, and negative in the interval negative infinity to negative 2. The quadratic is negative times negative times negative. That gives me a negative in the interval negative infinity to negative 2. Negative times negative times positive. That gives me a positive in the interval negative 2, 3. Negative times positive gives me a negative in the interval 3 to infinity, and it is also equal to 0 when x is negative 2 and equal to 0 when x is equal to 3. Since I'm trying to determine the values of x for which the quadratic is greater than or equal to 0, this will include the values x equal to negative 2, x equal to 3, and all the values in the interval negative 2 to 3 that give me a positive quantity. Putting everything together, the domain will be the interval from negative 2 to 3 closed. To find the domain of G, with equation square root of 2x squared minus 10x minus 12, we must again solve the inequality 2x squared minus 10x minus 12 greater than or equal to 0. I will use the sign of a quadratic to solve the inequality. Again, I'm going to factor the left. And that will give me 2 times x minus 6 times x plus 1 greater than or equal to 0. On the number line, this corresponds to three intervals. Intervals negative infinity to negative 1, negative 1, 6, and 6, infinity. Factor 2 is positive in all intervals. Factor x plus 1 is 0 when x is equal to negative 1. It is positive in the intervals negative 1, 6 and 6, infinity, and it is negative in the interval negative infinity to negative 1. Factor x minus 6 is 0 when x is equal to 6. It is positive in the interval 6, infinity, and it is negative in the intervals negative infinity, negative 1 and negative 1 to 6. The quadratic is positive times negative, that gives me a positive answer in the interval negative infinity comma negative 1. Positive times positive in the interval negative 1 to 6, that gives me a negative answer, and positive times positive that gives me a positive in the interval 6 comma infinity. It is also equal to 0 when x is equal to negative 1 and x is equal to 6. Since I'm trying to determine the values of x for which the quadratic is greater than or equal to 0, this will include the values x equal to negative 1, x equal to 6, and all values in the interval from negative infinity to negative 1 and from 6 to infinity where the sign is positive. Therefore, the domain equals the interval from negative infinity comma negative 1 closed union 6 comma infinity.